Meet me on the softer side. Meet me on the softer side. Softer side of your heart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. You can find out about this and all of our other author events at www.skylightbooks.com, where you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. You can also follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at facebook.com. If you'd like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. And don't forget, Skylight Books depends on listeners like you to help support us. So whether you're in our neighborhood or browsing online, buy a book or two to help ensure that we'll be around for a long, long time. Thanks and enjoy.
But tonight we have Ben Marcus with us, and we're completely delighted to have him with his newest novel, which is The Flame Alphabet. It says that it invites the question, what is left of civilization when we lose the ability to communicate with those that we love, which I love that. It also has a great book trailer. If you haven't seen it, go online. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review and named it a pick of the week. They said, The Flame Alphabet invites the question, language kills in Marcus's audacious new work of fiction, a richly elusive look at a world transformed by a new form of illness. Biblical in its Old Testament sense of wrath, Marcus's novel twists America's quotidian existence into something recognizable yet wholly alien to our experience. Ben is also the author of Notable American Women, The Father Costume, and The Age of Wire and String. He's the editor of the Anchor book of New American Short Stories, and his stories have appeared in Harper's Magazine, The New Yorker, The Paris Review, McSweeney's, Tin House, and Conjunctions. He's a recipient of the Whitting's Writers Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction, and awards from Creative Capital Foundation and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He lives in New York City and Maine. Please welcome Ben Marcus.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I will read from my new book, The Flame Alphabet. It's about, in the book, the speech of children is making people sick. Adults, and the narrator, Sam, and his wife, Claire, are facing a kind of dilemma about whether or not to leave their teenage daughter behind. And I'll read sort of from the late, early, middle, long part, where they're really feeling worse, and their daughter is kind of realizing that her presence, her speech is killing them, and she's starting to try to keep her distance a little bit. So I'll just read a sort of a short reading, and then I'm happy to take questions after if you have them. Also, just totally questions unrelated to the book, too. I'd really like to address those. By early December, we huddled at home, speechless. If we spoke, it was through faces gripped in early rigor mortis. Our neighborhood had gone blank, killed down by winter. It was too cold even for the remaining children to do much hunting. I don't know how else to refer to their work, but sometimes they swarmed the block, flooding houses with speech until the adults were repulsed to the woods. You'd see a neighbor with a rifle, and you'd hear that rifle go off. The trees stood bloodless, barely holding on in the wind. We sat against the window and waited, spying out at the children when they roved through. The children, they should have been called something else. Barking toxic vocals through megaphones as they held hands in the street. I hoped they wouldn't turn and see us in the window, come to the door. I hoped they wouldn't walk up the lawn and push their megaphones against the glass. And always I hoped not to see our Esther in these crowds. But too often there she was in the pack, one of the tallest, bouncing in the winter nighttime fog, breathing into her hands to keep warm. She'd finally found a group of kids to run off with. If there was an escape to engineer, we failed to do so, even while some neighbors loaded cars, smuggling from town when they'd had enough. The quarantine hadn't been declared, but in our area they weren't letting children through checkpoints except by bus. Basic containment. If you wanted to leave, you left alone. Even so, bulky rugs were thrust into trunks, items that required 2 people to carry, usually wrapped in cloth, sometimes squirming of their own accord, a child's foot poking out. A clumsy game of hide and seek, children sprawled out in cargo carriers, disguised as something else, so parents could spend a few more minutes with what ailed them. Claire retired as my test subject. He's been testing medicine antidotes on his wife, and they haven't been working because he doesn't know anything about that. She stopped appearing in the kitchen for night treatments, declined the new smoke. When I served infused milk, she fastened her mouth shut. If she accepted medicine from me, she did so unwittingly, asleep, whimpering when the needle went in. I couldn't blame her falling away like that, embracing the shroud of illness, but I did. I conducted nightly campaigns of blame and accusation silently in the monstrous internal speech that is only half sounded out, a kind of cave speech one reserves for private airing. In these broadsides, Claire spun on a low podium and absorbed every accusation. If I prepared a bowl of steamed grain and left it on the table for her, salted as she liked it, pooling in the black syrup, she passed her spoon through it, held up a specimen for study, and could not, just never could, finally slide it in her mouth. For Claire, I cut cubes of meatloaf, and at best she tucked 1 or 2 in her mouth where she could suck on them until they shriveled to husks. Claire no longer slept in her bed, and she seemed too listless even to maneuver to the crafts room, to the guest room, to anywhere she might be able to fall unconscious in private. I was always trying to offer her a shield, a modesty curtain, so she could come undone, alone and unseen. She shouldn't have to collapse in hallways. If necessary, I helped her along at least to a corner where I could erect a temporary blind. Once I found her asleep in the bathroom, one eye stuck open, leaking a speckled fluid. I crouched down and closed the eye, blotted it with my shirt. It opened again, and she whispered at me, "Hi there." I looked down at her, and she blinked, perfectly alert. Claire must have thought she was smiling, but that was so far from a smile. With my fingers, I tried to change the feeling, to reshape her mouth. I couldn't have her looking at me like that. Her lips were cold, and they would not stay where I arranged them. Her face had the weight of clay. "Go back to sleep," was all I could think to say, and I draped a bath towel over her, leaving her to rest on the cold tiles. At home, I took charge of what remained of our dwindling domestic project. The blending of food into shakes, the cleaning of all of our gray traces. I formed a packing plan, a strategy with regard to the luggage, mapped a route to outskirt lodging. Our pajamas, robes, towels, dish rags, these I washed every day, closing myself in the laundry room where the hot engine of the machine drowned out noise and thought. Against the hum of the washer, I was, for a little while, nobody much, and this was how I preferred it. I left Esther's warm, folded clothes in her bedroom. Often they went untouched. Or later, after Esther had plowed through the house before returning to her gang, I'd find the pile toppled onto the floor, a heap of black crumbs like someone's ashes dumped over it. Claire's robe went mostly unwashed because she didn't like to take it off. And if I ever found her half asleep and staring into nowhere from her resting place, she wouldn't respond when I asked if I could do any laundry for her. She'd just smack her lips to indicate thirst. It'd be nice to have fresh clothes, right? I could clean these and have them right back to you. I tugged at her robe and she pulled away from me, threw an arm over her face. Your robe will be nice and warm out of the dryer. We could get you covered in extra blankets in the meantime. It'll be nice to be clean. You'll feel better. I spoke to Claire as if she understood me, but she only stared. I spoke to her through a stiff, heavy face that seemed fitted on my head solely to block me from speaking. I sounded like a man underwater. As our tolerance departed for the speech of children, so too did our ability to speak. Language in or out, we heard, produced or received, a problem any which way. To keep Claire hydrated, I'd have to peel back her hospital mask, prop her upright, and press the sippy cup straw through the gluey seal of her lips. I lowered the mask. I'm sorry, I'm reading the grimmest part of the book. I really apologize. I lowered the mask when she was done, and flowery welts of orange juice soaked through the fabric. When it was time to clean her, I filled a bowl with warm water, settled it over a towel at her bedside. With a washcloth, I soaped her neck and face. She lifted her chin, gathered her hair out of the way. I squeezed little pools of water over her throat. I placed another towel under her feet, then lifted and washed each leg, rubbing as softly as I could, watching the little streaks of redness follow my cloth. Claire's legs rose too easily in my hands, as though they'd been relieved of their bones. With the last of the water, I reached into Claire's robe and washed her stomach, the skin that once held her breasts. I peeled her from the bed so I could wash her back, pushing the washcloth under the robe, feeling each hollow between her ribs, a sponginess I did not want to explore. Then I settled her back down again, pulled up her covers, lifted the mask from her mouth so I could replace it with a clean one. She forced a smile, but a shadow had spread under her gums, a darkness inside her mouth. When I brought her soup, warmed the long bread she loved, or offered Claire some of the candies that usually she could never refuse, baby amber globes with a cube of salted caramel inside, at most she would roll over, heave, pull the quilt above her head. It was only when the front door swung open and Esther came in the house, sweating, crazed, in clothing I'd never seen, that Claire sat up, drawing on some last reserve of power. She always wanted to catch sight of Esther, to watch her from a doorway, so she followed her from room to room, keeping her distance, and Esther tolerated the stalking. You could see in her whole body the effort she made to endure this attention she loathed. Esther had changed. Her face was older, harder, filthy from her outings, but spectacularly beautiful. Of course, I must think this. I'm her father. Fathers do not easily succumb to assessments of ugliness where their children are concerned. Esther had never been a cute child, but she'd grown threateningly stunning in the last few months. She let her mother watch from a safe perimeter, and she was considerate enough not to turn on her with speech, to stop and speak until Claire fell. Esther saw her mother in doorways, looked away, said nothing. It was her greatest kindness to us, that silence. I will always appreciate the restraint she showed in those last days. Esther's birthday fell on a Sunday. There's a happy birthday scene coming up. Claire was oblivious. It's not happy. Wheezing beneath the medicated linen I'd dipped for her. I realized what the day was late in the afternoon, after crawling on the floor of the shower, the water softening my face. What was called Lebov's mark had grown in fast, a hardened lump under my tongue, anchoring it down. The shower seemed to help. On the tiled floor, I could tilt my face into the spray, let the heat loosen my throat. In the bathroom, I exercised my voice so that it would not flow from me in shapeless moans. Last year, when Esther turned 14, she'd wanted no party, just money and privacy. She used those words exactly, then said, "Why would you even ask me what I want if you have no intention of delivering on it?" Delivering on it was her phrase, to which Claire and I could only shrug, agree, say, "Okay, sure, we can give you that, honey." And then we wondered, how much? How much money? How much privacy does she want? Esther wanted us to promise that we'd not talk about the birthday, not mention her age, absolutely not remark on how she'd grown up or changed or stayed the same, not reference what she was supposedly like as a baby, since why would I want to know, she'd asked, what you think you used to think of me? She claimed such a detail was an obscure statistic, a piece of information that future corpses, her phrase, stored in their bodies as a charm. Esther reasoned that in any case we never felt fondly toward her at the time, that we loved her best in hindsight. It was true. Our family suffered from issues of calibration. Even now, she said, it's happening right now. Years from now, you will have distorted this moment, which is an awful moment, into something nice, and you'll badger me with that memory until I agree, which I'll only do to make you stop talking. You are professional distorters, incapable of simply seeing a situation for what it is. Years from now, the things we will do. In the end, Esther really did underestimate us. Memories of any kind for Esther were similarly off limits. Shed the skin and burn it, apparently. Memories that asked Esther to picture herself doing something she no longer recalled, like skating in a rope chain of children when she was 7, down the traffic lines of an iced-over Wilderley Street. This was the week the elm fell to lightning and we built a snow fort circling the trunk. Or climbing a ladder stretched flat on the grass and pretending it was vertical so that each time she let go of it, she fake tumbled to the bottom. Such images were an attack. They caused physical pain, and why did we insist on hurting her? Why did it seem that we were instinctually driven to cause her pain? It was not right to hurt her on her birthday, especially on her birthday. What kinds of parents were we, after all? We'd grown so accustomed to hiding our feelings around Esther that it seemed easier to just not have those feelings in the first place. You people and your memories, she'd said through a sneer. Esther requested that her birthday not serve as an occasion for us to pretend that we were closer than we really were, since why should that random date, a date based on the most flawed and sentimental calendar, make us suddenly tell lies about how we really felt? "Sweetie," I countered. "See, like that," she said. "There's a lie right there. You think that a generic endearment will somehow show how you feel toward me, talk me out of how I actually feel. One word is going to do that, a word used for pets. How many people use that exact word to hide what they feel? It's like you're throwing up on me, actually. I feel like you just threw up on me." But in the years before these revelations and rules, before she was overwhelmed by insights she felt compelled to share with us, we'd had birthday parties. We staved off tantrums and avalanches of greed, accommodated in our home the children who seemed to function, if barely, as Esther's friends. Along with these preteen colleagues, we welcomed skulking parents who would invariably let one of their babies had not been invited, but there they were, there they always were, go off on a shelf-clearing campaign. Then a parent would quietly retreat without the baby to the off-limits master bathroom and take a toilet-wrecking shit that could never be flushed, only to emerge with the blissful look of someone whose own home is not being destroyed at this very moment, stepping half apologetically, but really with relief, with genuinely visible relief and perhaps even a kind of lurid joy. This party is really fun, over dumped cupcakes, grinding them further into the rug we should have pulled up before the party but did not. Because in the end, we always failed to imagine how savage these people could become. "There you are," the parent would scold the baby as if it was the baby who had disappeared. The baby would crawl over, try to stand, hold up its arms in supplication to be carried, then topple over. Depending on the baby, it would either sob, laugh, or be gorgeously oblivious to all mortal proceedings. One of those three behavioral paths. "Come smell the shit I took," the parents never said. Instead, the one-sided rhetorical patronizing dialogue would commence. "What did you do, huh? What did you do?" the parent would interrogate the baby, picking it up and seeming to study it for evidence. A theater of mock blame the parent should have been directing to the mirror. "Why not ask someone who can actually answer you?" I wouldn't say to them. "I'll tell you exactly what your baby did. Would you really like to know? Can you handle a conversation with a real live adult?" I stood and stared at these people, and they serially failed to read my mind. Instead, they would be locked in some kind of airborne, mouth-tickling activity with the baby, holding it aloft and, to all appearances, trying to eat it. A baby who, by now, so many years later, as a 7 or 8-year-old, I'd guess, was probably shouting that same parent into a corner, turning the parent pale, speaking with so much force that the parent was husking, shelling, dying in a house somewhere probably not so far away. Had those parents built a locker beneath the stairs, as we did, cut in a peephole, lined the little room with pillows? Had they shielded themselves from the speech of their offspring, effaced their hearing, or damaged the little ones themselves, stopped the reeking language at its source? Were they pumping white noise from the old slab radio, and did it not fully hide the child's speech? Or perhaps the parents had already fled upstate, if they were smart, if they knew how to shut down their attachment apparatus and see their children for what they really, most essentially, were, agents of such terrible mouth sounds that, relation or not, one hoped never to see them again. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Stand here all night. Or we don't have to do that. Yeah?
What gives you the idea that noise would like
What gave me the idea? Well, I guess I was thinking of language as very potent already. Something, even in this family, before anything bad happens, they're using speech to destroy each other. So it seemed like a way to make things worse, more dramatic, to literalize that. To think, okay, well, in a maybe even normal family, when we talk to each other, we can completely ruin each other. We can say a few things if we're close to somebody that will maybe, change them forever, hurt them forever. And it's just, little speech sounds. So I think I wanted just to turn up the volume on it and see what would happen. Well, what if that was literally true? It is already true in some figurative sense, and some families keep it all in. Some families don't talk this way to each other. Maybe just think it. Some don't even think it, maybe. So I think I was taking something I was already observing and feeling and wondering what would happen if it was stronger. Yes?
There's 5 kids who call me you or undoculous. Relating to this, not only the content of the words themselves, and I was intrigued when I almost on the same topic, saw the synopsis.
Yeah.
As to what it was about. And I've only read the first 5 pages since I came in tonight, but the characters were struggling with medical equipment to treat some unknown at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I hope you didn't get a spoiler tonight.
I wrote on the beach.
Oh.
People struggling with the inevitability of radioactive poison after.
The world is ending, and they're in like Australia, and it hasn't ended there yet. Australia's still okay.
There's a few people that haven't been affected.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were dealing in a way that I'm completely unknown how to deal with this onslaught at this time.
Some were hoarding and trying to hide, and some are praying, right? There's different responses.
Right. And in that particular story, you could tell when it was. It was in the future.
Yeah.
It was, you need to question it. It was in the future.
Nice wind-up.
Time,
Yes.
the time frame was there sometime in the future after the nuclear holocaust.
Got it.
But from what you've read in this, we were intentionally staying away from a place in time or a location. It seems vague as to...
Yeah, you're right. And I suppose it's mostly intentional. Somehow fixing it in time and calling it the future, I just found I lost interest. It seemed to take some kind of charge out of it. It also has a lot of real place names and a couple invented ones, and it's not clear. It's sort of set somewhere outside of Rochester, but at one point my editor brought a map out and it was like, so where are they? And you know, it's just like I wanted to point to my head, because I think, on the other hand, so I think I like the notion of a made-up space, but I don't like the notion of it seeming too made up. And I probably can't have it both ways, but I think I like making, you know, there seem to be these choices. It could be a parallel universe, or it could be the future, it could be in the past, and in some sense I'm looking for some different way to situate it. And I feel unsatisfied if I actually say, you know, I know that's probably not really a good answer, but I like pretending it's in a real place, but not so much where like I want all the street names to be correct. You know, that also seems somehow like some very sad for it to be too specifically locked into a place. So I think I'm probably undecided, and it's just showing up. Yeah. I could have maybe let people sort of fill in the place names themselves and the date, so you could have it as you wanted. Yes, Al Brown. Former student.
I haven't read the whole thing yet, but...
Well, come back when you have, son.
Can you speak at all towards, like, maybe the trajectory of the things that you have written in terms of this feeling at least more accessible than maybe Blind String, or I don't know, how did you approach this differently than the other larger books that you have done?
Yeah, well, in some sense, when I finish a book, it's like this really, really bad marriage, and I'm left with nothing, you know, hatred and resentment, and also a sense of personal failure that I probably could have made that work. It was my selfishness that killed that relationship. And so then there's a sort of that long period of grief and, you know, recovery, and you're wondering, you want to, you know, have another project. And in some sense, I think I think in a corrective way, like all the things that I thought of as problems, I want to not commit those same mistakes or try something else. On the other hand, I've been writing for a while, and I realize that I go to that kind of like couples counseling, and I say all the right things about moving on, and I don't. I'm writing the exact same thing. Like, I feel like there will be a man in a hole, and there will be a tube, and there will be someone above that hole going like, rah, and there'll be a man going, that hurts me. Like, that's what I write. And I go to great lengths to pretend, no, they're just having tea. But then that scene ends with the man in a hole and getting shouted at. So I think, well, I have to outsmart that, right? If it's like the well I go to has just got this one idea in it. So then how do you get around it? Or, because I think most people actually are kind of not even interested in that idea. So it's not like, well, I've had that one idea, but it's really great. It's like one idea, and there's like 5 people who are like, I fucking loved your idea, and everyone else is like, that is so stupid. So, I think I deal with like my own revulsion, but then I encounter a lot of revulsion out in the world. Not you, great people, but I try to realign and do something different with my limitations. And I had never written a whole book with one narrator. That was something I just thought, I'm going to restrict myself. I think a lot about restrictions, and we probably used to talk about that in class, like closing stuff down, right? Not having a bunch of narrators, a bunch of shifting points of views, and all of that. I just think if I make it very, very, very simple, which I've never done, maybe I'll yield a different story. And also, I really had never written anything with a lot of scenes and a lot of kind of time marching on. So it was an attempt to try something else, not to sell out or try to like change. That's so I think that's how it is. How's your work going?
Just a man in the hole.
Yeah, you're doing that too?
Great idea.
Yeah, it's good. Well, you'll be my one disciple. I have to abuse you then, right? Because I'll be jealous. You're more talented. You're younger. Yeah, you're gonna take that idea and actually put some kind of contemporary shine on it, and all that labor I did will just get ignored, and you'll be the one known for it. Yeah, I'll take my anger out on my kids. They'll just think I'm cranky, but it's really because you stole my idea. My life is going to be great. Yes.
Do you relate to it more as like a disaster book or an apocalypse book? Is it like, it's like in temptation or something where it's like, society is this huge problem, are we going to be able to rise above it? Or is it like everything ending and come down to hell? Which one is it?
I like that last one. That's good. That just seems like more of a party. It's funny. I really resisted throughout the whole book, like going anywhere even outside the family. I found that I wanted this to be the family story, but I always felt pulled to actually explain how, at one point I was like, what the fuck is going on in France? So like, are they just fine? They're just hanging out in France and they can, I used to talk about this with my wife who's a writer, Heidi Julovitz, and just sort of say, so like, do I have to say like where's Luxembourg in this? Are they, and it just seemed that the more I had to try to sketch that out, the less interesting it got. I was thinking a little bit about The Road, McCarthy's The Road, which is pretty interesting in the way it refuses any explanation, and you have to use your imagination, but it's also sort of kind of clear. It's like a nuclear holocaust. It's just there's no backstory. None. And I think that was handled really, really well, because I think there's some apocalyptic fiction that's all about the mechanics, right? Like this is how everything ended. And it seems like, when I hear from some people who have read this, or, someone said, well, now you have to write a prequel, which is my dream, prequel dream. But, I would love to, I think I really would love to write something where an explanation wasn't needed. At the same time, I think as a writer you can't ignore that it's a really deep craving of people, and so you have to outsmart the need to have the explanation. You can't just say fuck you and your need for information, not you personally, but you have to somehow, kill the need in the person, kill the need in the reader. So I totally didn't answer your question. It's interesting, though. I like that you have a distinction between apocalyptic and, what was the other one? Disaster. Yeah. Are there others? Are those the two choices?
It just seemed like that was the most likely.
Yeah.
A matter of scale.
Well, at one point, towards the end of the book, the narrator actually, another spoiler, you might want to cover your ears, sir. He actually addresses the reader. And I've spent my life as a writer saying I will never address the reader. I will hold out. I will not do it, and I did it. And he said, he sort of refers to a future time as though, someone actually has to come along and read this because, as people point out, how is he's writing a novel? He's writing this down, but he can't use language. Like it's a puzzler. And so he says something like, I picture you holding this aloft and trying not to be sick while reading it, or like imagining that some solution has come along. And there is actually a solution that does come up for this language toxicity, but it's really not a particularly good one. It's got some moral issues. It sort of comes at the cost of like some solutions do. So he's thinking ahead to a possible future where there's some kind of recovery. But I think the book probably makes it seem sort of like there's a low probability. Anyway, yeah.
If you don't mind, I wanted to possibly change the subject slightly by thanking you for writing an essay years ago where you trashed Jonathan Franzen for dissing William.
Who?
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
As an avid reader of Thomas Pynchon and a sometime reader of William Gaddis, I had this terrible suspicion about Jonathan Franzen, and I felt very vindicated by your essay that you wrote about how he was kind of going out of his way to criticize his peers after he had been psychologically traumatized by Oprah, apparently. That's what I got out of it anyway. And I was just hoping that you might want to talk about that a little bit or comment on that.
I think you should.
It's one of my favorite things.
I'll sell you 5 minutes of my podium time because I want to try to break even on this trip.
Is it all done with now? You've forgotten all about it?
No. I will make a distinction. I was not talking about his fiction in that essay. And I wrote a much longer essay that got edited by Harper's. They were very interested in, the essay had, it had an attack mode, but it also had like a self-grooming mode. It had an informational mode. I did a lot of research about what happens in the brain when we read. There's also a pretty fascinating thing called the Lexile Index that rates the supposed difficulty of a lot of books in order to determine the grade level for books. And so I put in a lot of texts, and I talked a lot about that. And I was interested in why some of the books I love, when I showed them to other people, they just would look like a foreign language. People were like, this fucking sucks. It's awful. And I would think, oh no, it's like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. And so I wrote about a lot of things, but they, and I don't want to just blame Harper's, but it was their fault. They were interested really in the attack mode, that all the self-grooming was taken out. And I don't know if you've ever read an essay that's all self-grooming, but can you even picture it? So you'll never get to see that.
I don't even know what that means.
I know. No, see, it would have blown your mind. Like a new way to write an essay. So he had made a series of critical statements about sort of the harm that was being caused by difficult fiction and how it sent the wrong message about literature to people. He's talking about like the people who read one book a year don't want to be told that Ulysses is a great book because then they might read Ulysses and get the idea that all literature is like that. And so I felt that he was in a very good position with his fan base to have, there would be no reason he would feel threatened if I came out and really disagreed with his positions. And
wasn't that the criticism that was originally labeled kind of at him as well? So it was almost like this weird...
Well, his own sort of trajectory as a writer was hard to ignore in that way.
It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome on his part is what it felt like.
You really should write an essay then about this. So many things are compared to the Stockholm syndrome now.
It's easy.
Right? Like you guys in the audience, it's like the Stockholm syndrome. But even for me, it's like the Stockholm syndrome too. You got to feel like the original people who started the Stockholm syndrome, like do they get royalties? I don't think about it a lot. I found that as an essay writer, I wrote too personally for people. It seemed to really not, even the people I think I wanted to seem like I was defending, they seemed unhappy. they seemed like, I hadn't described so-called experimental writing properly. And so I just felt that I didn't really want to play. I didn't really care. I thought I was fairly naive about what it would be to write that essay, and I didn't think I could even hurt him, because it seemed like he's a megalithic figure who shouldn't feel threatened if that's what he believes, and we happen to disagree. So I don't know. I did kind of go into my hole after that. I just thought, I didn't calibrate the essay in a way that seemed to like actually cause more conversation, which is all I really wanted to do.
It did here. And
did it?
Now there's one person who was vindicated because of it.
I have heard of you, sir. Okay, well, thanks. I appreciate it. Okay, one more question. Yes?
You have an interesting way of refreshing basic words, and even mouth sounds with speech.
Yeah.
And earlier in Ancient Wire, Warren String, words like sun, wind, and rain. I don't know if schematic is the right way, but when you would use those words, was it more like feel, or did you have almost like an alternate definition pack or string, or?
Yeah, I think I see what you're asking. A lot of it was intuitive. I think I didn't have a system, because I couldn't just do it at will. And sometimes it just sounded too kind of obtuse and didn't really work. I think when I was first writing, I thought about what I tried to write. I think I was reading people like Ann Beattie and Jane Ann Phillips and Carver and Richard Ford and Andre Debussy and writers I really like, but I think I sort of tried to ape that, and I was just not any good at it. And then, I sort of thought I should just try to write in some new way. But, I didn't really even know why. But what that meant was not taking words for granted, just in a really basic way. So, like, not even taking their definitions for granted. And I had this idea that I just couldn't really write a basic sentence without sort of playing with it. And, it's sort of nothing fancier than that. I think in a lot of ways that urge has left me, or the ability to do it has left me, and I take great relief now in simple sentences like, and then he got in his car and drove away. Because I would never have done that before. I would have spent weeks really, really just so, anxious about how to take that apart and rebuild it. And I'm sort of glad I did that, but also glad now that I can kind of turn that urge off sometimes just to see what happens. So I'm not sure, I felt like it sort of had me stuck after a while. What a sad note to end on. If there's one more, there might not be. Yeah. Perky. All right.
But in terms of dating, I'm sorry, being married to Heidi, what's that relationship like?
We still date too. On the side.
When I was 22, my big writing professor said, don't date writers because you do.
Yeah.
She's like, playwright's not a
Are you dating her? No, you're a professor. Okay, go ahead. You're very strict.
I just wonder, in terms of that relationship, how did you affect both?
Honestly, I feel so lucky. I've learned so much from her. She's, to me, a genius. She has so much ability. She's got a very strange sense of humor. She's willing to reinvent herself with her books. It's funny that, because when we first met, it was very easy to, there was this way that I didn't even feel like I was a writer like that, and what I was writing, we were so different, and we were people now sort of joke that, like, our books are kind of getting more and more in common. And she does influence me, and she's got really interesting insights, and she can be a really harsh reader. In some sense it's hard, like when I met her, she just gotten this huge publishing deal and was, in some sense, like, instantly launched, and it was weird to suddenly be in that, like, to meet people like making big advances and all that, because I was in a very tiny little small press world, and there's some strange things socially about it, but they all kind of leveled out. And I love people though who issue cautions about who to date. I think those people should all get together and write these rules up and enforce them. Because I know when I'm looking for someone to date, I really do just focus on their profession. I actually don't pay any attention to sexual attraction. Who cares? It's ridiculous. And you can fake that. I just really want to know that they don't do what I do. And then it's on. It's really just on. Yeah, is it a bad idea in theory? Maybe, but, I don't know. I might quit writing too, and then we won't. Thank you all for listening. I suppose, yeah.
You have been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all of our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Fragile Gang. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, and the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.